Welcome to episode 96 of I Thought I Knew How, a podcast about knitting and life and all sorts. I'm your host, Anne Frost, and this episode was recorded on March 3rd, 2023. I have another interview for you today, this time with Rosamund Black, director of the Museum of Welsh Textiles at the Old School Witten in Wales. And I'll also share just a touch about my recent trip to Wales. Let's get started. First, thank you to the newest patrons of the I Thought I Knew How podcast, Karen, Cinnamon and Jeff, and the Nutty Nitty sisters. I have been preparing things for tax day recently and have caught myself up on my accounting. And so I was able to see in a very real way that my patrons are paying the bills for this project. Together, we are collecting interviews with fiber artists around the world, sharing information about this craft we love, and spreading facts about the environmental and economic benefits of wool. This is a group endeavor. Thank you for being a part of it. If you'd like to come on board the production team, please visit patreon.com/IThoughtIKnewHow to learn more about the benefits available to you as a thank you for helping move the show forward. Special thanks go out to Knit New Haven and the Morehouse Merino Flock for sponsoring the podcast. I was recently down at Knit New Haven to pick up my new spinning wheel. I'm sure I'll talk about that more at some point in the future, but for now, I've just got it home and assembled and am practicing my treadling. I'm looking forward to getting some fiber spinning soon. Many thanks go out to Linda at Knit New Haven for making the ordering process so painless, and to Laura for helping me lift the thing so I could get it in the car. The Morehouse Merino Flock group is in the middle of knitting the Strength Within shawl, but fear not if you're a little late to the party. All the videos and instructions are there in the group so you can hop in and get caught up and finish the shawl up with the rest of the knitters. Learn more about the supportive online community by visiting morehousemerinoflock.com. I have been back from Wales for about a month now. It was a brilliant visit. I hadn't planned on this being a knitting or woolly trip, but as so often happens, wool finds me. If you'd like to hear an overview of the wool side of the trip and see the wool acquisitions I made along the way, I'd encourage you to hop over to YouTube and look for the Purl Together channel. I recently did a video podcast there with Jana where I shared the places I visited and the yarn and blankets that I picked up on the trip. The one wool-related thing that I planned on ahead of time was an interview with Rosamund Black of the Museum of Welsh Textiles. I spent the first night of the trip at Gladstone's Library, which is a private library founded by William Gladstone, who was Prime Minister of the UK for a total of 12 years. It's a residential library, and those who are staying there have access to the reading rooms. I spent hours there reading as much as I could about Welsh wool, sheep, and industry, and it was just a mere fraction of what I learned in the same amount of time spent with Rosamund Black toward the end of the trip. Rosamund is a scholar of Welsh textiles, and the collection of the museum that she has curated covers all forms of textiles from the area, from handwoven to machine woven, knits and quilts, formal wear to workwear. Rosamund has lived in Wales for 20 years now, and as you'll hear, her interest in textiles extends beyond the borders of Wales. But her knowledge of Welsh textiles is extensive and goes well beyond knitting. There were/are knitters in Wales, but historically Wales is known much more for their woven goods. We had our talk as we moved through the Museum of Welsh Textiles that she has established in Powys on the east side of Wales. Along the way, we cover dyeing, knitting, weaving, and quilting. We touch on the development of mills over time, production knitting, and the construction of clothing, which was dictated largely by the limitations set by the home looms of the area. And I think along the way you get a sense of just how much history Rosamund has been able to fit into a relatively small space, and the value of seeing pieces in person rather than through photos and video, and how much thought goes into restoration work. I will add that at times during this walking tour of the museum, there are moments when we could have described things a little better for a listening audience. I did remove a few of those moments but I kept in the parts that are there because in that moment, Rosamond made an insightful comment that needed to be preserved. One final thing, early in the tour, we talk about the Welsh national costume. If you are not familiar with the Welsh national costume, I encourage you to pause for a moment and search for an image. We do describe it in the course of things, but it would be helpful from the start of the talk to have a look. I will put a direct link in the show notes for you as well. If you know how to access those, you can just find the link and click through while you listen. And now, my tour of the Museum of Welsh Textiles with its curator, Rosamond Black. How did you first get interested in textiles?
My father was a tailor, and my mother and grandmother both knitted constantly. And my grandfather was an engineer, so it was a house full of people who did things. And I think from a very, very early age, I started playing around with things. To my mum's annoyance, I used to love going to jumble sales and coming back with things to play with. And I very, very early on developed the idea that old things were better made than new things, and then just fell in love with period pieces. And most of my early work was with costume, and I was dealing in old pieces and recreating pieces where they couldn't be found. So you're on one hand handling and seeing a lot of original pieces, and when you come to reproduce them, you realise that the cloth we have now is very different. So you start to understand why, where the differences are, what the history is that changed it. And I think whatever I've worked in, I've been dealing with old things, and they fascinate me. Once you get to the point of looking closely at what was involved, then you start to look at who it was that made them. And along with the appreciation of the textile items, there's an appreciation of the culture that gave birth to them. And I don't just love Welsh stuff. I think I like all textiles. Anything that is handmade, they've got a particular quality. And it's just really, since I've been in Wales 20 years plus now, you start to find out what's peculiar to the locality, and then you want to go a little bit deeper, find out a little bit more. And over the last 20 years, I've had the opportunity to work with other people that either produce wool or dye or weave. And my mind wants to try all of them. And it also wants to collect things. So we have a museum.
And we are standing here in the hallway of the museum now. Do you want to share about this building and how it came to be your textile museum?
We took the school on 4 years ago. It was a small rural school, donated by one of the local gentry in the early 1700s. It ran as a school until 3 or 4 years before we took it over. So there was a lot of heartache in the community to lose it. And we've had some lovely comments from people saying that it's nice that it's going to be used for something semi-educational again. And once we've got it up to scratch, we'll be teaching. So again, all textile related subjects or arts related. But here, we're standing here in front of the cabinet because we have the gallery here, which is for work of local craftspeople. Really, whatever, either artists or crafts, we find that we think need publicising or a chance to get to people. But we have the museum on the other side, and in the middle we have this cabinet that we set up because we put an exhibition on of paintings that were all done with natural pigments. So we drew this cabinet up thinking, the same pigments are used in the manufacture of pottery, in the manufacture of paints, which then use more earth pigments and plant material. And then you come to dyeing, where again you've got a lot of continuity between them. And again, it's another fascinating thing to understand that in all of them you had to know the materials. In this section referring to paints, there are small manuals down here which show what you have to do in an apprenticeship 7, 8, 9-year apprenticeships to be a painter, a house painter. Because you couldn't just go and buy paint. You had to prepare it yourself, and you had to guarantee that you could repeat that colour. And the same goes for dyeing. At one time, you only had certain available dyes, but you could get a lot of variation out of them. One thing here, I was donated by a friend, is somebody's dye sample book. And we have to keep it covered because it will fade.
Yes.
But luckily, they've said what the wool was, what the fleece was, what the dye was, how long it was dyed, how long it was mordanted. And this was done in the 90s, but it's really a sort of revival of an old craft. And if you look back at old stuff, they were past masters. These I have to protect because they you can see some fade and some don't. But you look at some old pieces, that piece is printed, they're natural dyes. And that's probably about late 1800s. And it hasn't faded at all.
Yeah, that's lovely.
The technology was so good that I feel we've lost a lot. And the whole point of wanting to teach is it gives me more time to experiment and see if you can get to the bottom of a question. One of my favourite questions is how the Welsh dyed such good reds. Because if you look at the costume and the blankets, you see a really strong predominance of red, and they're good reds.
Yeah, we're here in front of a display of the national costume now, and this was your exhibit for the last season, correct? This is what it focused on, was on the Welsh national costume. And do you want to maybe, before we describe, do you want to maybe address the topic of how this came to be considered the Welsh national costume?
It's a very difficult one. We have postcards outside that are a set of sketches, either drawn by or drawn for Lady Llanova. A lot of people have assumed that she invented the Welsh costume. But what she was actually doing was recording the costume of the day, because she came to prominence for writing an award-winning essay on the importance of preserving customs. So if we look carefully, we can see what she was doing was recording what she saw. She's recorded the costumes that she would have seen the women wearing when they came into market, mostly from South Wales, so it would be Carmarthenshire, Pembrokeshire, and some of Glamorganshire. These costumes are very, very close to the ones she was seeing. This is the very typical Cardiganshire costume that people are semi-familiar with. It's what the modern-day Welsh costume is loosely based on. It's a very, very tight, heavy, felted, condensed cloth. Very, very tough, extremely windproof, heavy. And we have had some examples of these that have the underskirt, which is called a pais, in matching cloth. But from
to the bodice. Yeah, matching the bodice.
The correct word for it is bedgown. It's almost typical of all of the rural communities that were wearing the cutaway over a skirt, either with long tails or with short. Pembrokeshire, they say, wore a short one. I've never come across one, which I live in hope. But quite a few of these do survive, and I half think it's because they were their best. They were worn for market days and for church with the silk hat. The other things that are very, very typical of the costume is the shoulder shawl. To wear a woolen garment like that, you'd have to wear a cotton one first. And you see this in all 18th century costume, where with the French ones, they'll call it a fichu. Underneath, then your woolen garment on the top, But in Wales, because it's cold, we have a woolen one as well. So maybe in the summer you'd see them just with a cotton one, but definitely in the winter a woolen one. Topped off in very, very cold weather with a full-size shawl. These full-size shawls at one time were worn by everybody.
Men and women.
Yeah. Men wore a slightly different one, slightly different proportion. This is square.
Okay.
The only men's ones we've found are rather like the Shetland shepherd's shawls, very long and worn wrapped around you. But they're thick enough and warm enough to be worn in the place of a cloak or a coat. Mm-hmm. A cloak would take up a lot more material. And the Welsh did wear cloaks, but not everybody had them. There are some areas where you hear accounts from visitors that touring around Wales where they'll say that women are wearing shawls or cloaks. But very typical of the Carmarthenshire area to wear a shawl.
So it was square, folded triangularly.
Folded triangularly.
And then sort of rolled over at the neck a bit to help it stay in place.
A lot of times in the early pictures and in the pictures Lady Llaniver had drawn, they also used shawl as a shopping bag. Mm-hmm. You can tuck it around and tuck it back into your waistband, and you can carry anything you want in it, including the baby.
Right.
And it's well known as a nursing shawl. But before that, they would have been worn for all occasions, nursing or not. Mm-hmm. They just remained as a nursing shawl. I think they were almost handed down mother to. There are a lot, you do find a lot of pure white ones.
Okay.
And I often wonder if they were gifts. Mm-hmm. That seems, but the nursing shawl was still in use in South Wales up until the 50s. And you get a lot of peachy, bluey, grey colours. And that's really typical of that age. But they're also, you'll find that there are different weights. This one's a middle weight.
Okay.
Some of them are very thick and heavy. There's one here that is very, very fine. Flannel was used for everything, from petticoats to the underskirt to the top coat. And somewhere we have shift as well. When cotton was introduced, I think that replaced flannel for undergarments in a lot of areas.
So there's a few more elements to the national costume. The apron.
The most memorable thing for most people is the hat.
Is the hat. I was going to leave the hat for last.
We think
it is a tall top hat looking hat. The shape is a bit different. Yes, wider brim, narrower top. And you said they're silk?
Slightly yes, it's a silk plush.
Okay.
It's a silk velvet, which is then laid flat.
Okay.
Lots and lots of people mistake them and call them beaver hats.
Because they do have like a furry look to them.
There's a reason for that. Before the introduction of silk hats, all hats were felt, beaver felt. And beaver felt is raised and then smoothed off in very much the same way. But they were slightly softer hats. And if you again look at the early paintings, mostly late 1700s, early 1800s, you see where English visitors have come, watercolourists have taken watercolour sketches. Nearly all the women are wearing a very, very tall hat, but with slightly softer brim. And I think that's the transition between the beaver and the silk hat. These seem to have come in the early 1800s. The majority of them are around 1850, 1860.
And so the base of the silk ones, is that done over a cardboard?
It's a buckram, which is like a stiffened linen.
Oh, okay.
And it's got a sort of gluiness in it that sets hard, but when it's steamed, you can fuse the silk velvet to it so that it remains as one piece. When you get ones that are in poor condition, you can feel that it's beginning to separate. Lots of the hats seem to have come from London or Paris, but there were also Welsh makers too.
Okay.
So
were these being worn elsewhere? Or were they just being made in London and Paris and Wales was
the
market, right?
Some of them have labels in them, which is rather nice. This one's about the best condition one that I can.
So the underside of the top of the hat has the maker stamp.
Yeah.
Or the brand stamp.
And it has London.
There you go. And it has a lining on the inside. Is that also silk, or is that a...
Yeah, these are normally silk. And it has this drawstring, which is very, very clever, because you can tighten that drawstring up so that it fits your head perfectly.
Perfect.
A lot of the old pictures you see of them, they're always wearing it over the bonnet, and very often with ribbons attached to the hat so that you can hold it on.
There is a white bonnet that they would wear underneath with lace around the face.
Yeah. On most of them, the bonnet is slightly flatter on the top with a lot of gopher pleats around the face. And again, that's something that's quite typical of costume of that period. You see it in lots of Victorian paintings across Europe. So lots and lots of attributes of the costume are very similar to European tradition. But what makes them particularly Welsh is the cloth. Everybody, France, Germany, Holland, they're wearing a coat over a skirt and an apron. But it's the cloth that sets them apart. The aprons in a lot of Wales were wool, sometimes wool and linen, which would make it a lot stronger. And the working day ones were quite possibly just pure linen. That would mean you could wash it and look after it a bit better. But you get a lot of this type. They always have a central seam showing that they've been woven on a very, very small loom, most probably at home. Again, it's a tradition that you'll find in France, Romania, Hungary. We're still weaving like that a little later than us, so you get a chance to see what they were weaving. And I had to one day, just as a comparison, buy a Dutch skirt because it looked like construction, everything, almost identical to a Welsh skirt, but in colouring that you just wouldn't have seen in Welsh. And the wool is a lot coarser and a slightly different weave. It's more of a satin weave than this type of weave, but if you'd have told me it was Welsh, that it came out of your grandmother's cupboard, I'd have to really think hard. It's just the colouring that made me think no. But it was really important for me to hold one and see how different it was. And lots of the skirts, there's some quite interesting bits in the way they make them. Because the wool is slightly thick, they made them onto a yoke of cotton or linen.
Oh, interesting.
Underneath.
So from the waist to the hip.
And lots of people have assumed it's like a basque. It's easier to gather that into your waist. Some are gathered and some are just flat like that one. If it was just wool gathering into your waist, it would be very, very bulky. And you've also got another thing to contend with. All of these skirts are the width of the loom.
Right. Okay.
So if you're taller, you'll have to extend it.
Yeah.
And it's never going to be seen. Lots of people assume they're petticoats because it has that on. They can't be a garment. But when you have a coat that covers it, and an apron that covers the front, you're never going to see it.
Yeah. It's brilliant.
But yeah,
that's very clever.
And the other one that you don't see many surviving examples of is a cotton version. And this would have just been an everyday working blouse, but it's still long to cover the skirt and just simply wraps over. So it's basically shaped like a kimono.
Oh, interesting.
Without the big long sleeves.
Yeah.
But just blocks,
as far as
square
how it
blocks,
closes, yeah,
with a turn back cuff. But not many of those survive because they weren't best.
Yeah.
So, and they were far more common in North Wales. You see much more pictures of them wearing the blouses in North Wales rather than this type of coat.
Would that have just been because more trade going through there, more interaction with other people through the north?
No. It's difficult to decide why. I think people just form habits. You look at national costume in other countries and look at Germany, you've got different slight styles. It's something very similar about them all, but they've got their own little independent manners. These are quite interesting. This was painted in 1871 of a market scene in Swansea, watercolour painter. And it shows you the women wearing the typical coat, tucked up at the back, the shoulder shawl, against a lady in modern day dress.
Right.
There's one with the baby wrapped in the shawl. And
she looks like she's wearing a more modern bonnet than the top hat.
That's the fisherwoman's bonnets.
Okay.
They have a flat top, very, very flat. And it's always told that the whole reason of having them was they could carry the cockle baskets on the head.
Okay.
There's, again, I've never found one. They're the sort of things that I think they were straw. And they probably got squashed and destroyed. But all of them are wearing the Gopher bonnet underneath, either way. But these watercolours I find invaluable because you just get a little bit of an eye into what was going on.
Yeah. On the mannequins here, you have some knitting implements as well. Do you want to tell us about those?
Yes. Where you hear stories from people that were travelling through Wales in the late 1700s, early 1800s, one thing they all report about is that the women were knitting wherever they went. Wherever they walked, to market, to church, they were knitting. And in order to do that, they used a knitting sheath, which is much like the sheaths used in Yorkshire and Scotland, which tucks either into the band of the apron or is caught by the apron string, so that they can hold the needle firm and knit with one hand. They can still carry the market basket or a child or something else and continue knitting. It holds it very, very stable, and it's always been said that it keeps tension very, very good. This one is the sort of one that would have been made as a sweetheart's gift because they're carved and very, very fancy. And this one is carved with a chain from the bottom and a swivel carved out of one piece of wood with more chain links going down to a hanger with spikes on it. And that's to take the ball of wool. So the ball of wool is hanging there, and it's a central drawn ball of wool so that you can pull from the centre and keep knitting. And this lady has a much simpler version. Maybe a sweetheart's one just as well, but a much simpler.
But without the chain.
No, this one just has a swivel. You can see it would just allow the wool to move around a little bit and make knitting easier. And this is the other type of knitting sheath, whereas the sweetheart's one is very elaborate and is made in one piece. This is the stick, which are just turned with a little hole in the top, and nearly always some ridges, so that when it's tucked into your waistband, there's something to grip and it holds still. Along with the old type of steel knitting needles, so that they could 4 needles for your socks.
Right.
Something that you very seldom see women without in old pictures. If you look through old postcards and old photographs, every other one is knitting. Very difficult to actually see in the photographs how they're wearing these sheaths because they're tucked inside and not always visible, but yeah, rather nice to actually see them.
And we were talking before about the women who were engaged in production knitting, not just knitting for their families, tended to be knitting things like socks and caps for the marketplace.
In one respect, we can't know what they knitted for themselves, but we can know what they knitted for export or for sale, because if they were taking them to market, they were often taking them to a merchant who then sold them on. So we have record of how many were being sold on in dozens. And socks was the 17th, 18th, 19th century. It must have provided so many women with extra work. And you very, very often hear accounts of them being farming women who were taking goods into market, but would also take socks. Men knitted. There's another fireside job in the evening, sit and knit, because the women would spin. So the man might have been supplementing the pile of socks that was going to market that week. But there are quite a lot of accounts where it says a woman walked 15, 20 miles to market with a few pounds of butter. It hardly seems worth it. So if you can supplement that income with socks, the hat knitting was possibly earlier. There are late medieval into the Tudor period, lots of accounts of them wearing caps, and there are accounts of those having come from Wales. I think that tradition slowly petered out, but socks remained a staple.
One thing that I have been learning about on this trip is the amount of weaving that went on in Wales, both at home and when the Industrial Revolution kicked off in the factories of Wales. And we're just surrounded by so many examples of it here in the museum, both on, we already talked about it a little bit in the Welsh costume, but also in the bed covers that are hanging and folded up around us. And in the back, there's some examples of flannel shirts and nightgowns and things. So I just want to hand it over to you, Rosamond, and just be like, tell me everything.
It's very, very difficult to encapsulate work. All of it.
I know.
But as we discussed earlier, the old system was a semi-factory system where you had water mills providing the fulling service. So that's the finishing in the end. Until the Industrial Revolution, there was nothing else to do in a watermill. However, slowly the machinery for drafting the yarn got brought into those fulling mills. So they were providing the before and after service of converting to yarn. And then it was either sent out or bought out to the weavers. So the weavers were still working at home or in very, very small sheds. That continued up until about the 1920s.
Even with the industrial milling going on.
So you've got two very, very distinct types of mills. The early fulling mills were, a lot of them are late medieval and had been built, rebuilt. I went through a very nice document that gave the dates when lots of the mills were built and how much they were rented out for. So you could take from a landowner a lease for a mill with the machinery, everything in situ, and become a miller, either for corn or you could run a pandy. And sometimes they were combined. You could mill corn and then full wool. So those went on virtually unchanged since the late medieval period. When we had the Glendower risings, lots of these mills were destroyed, but then were rebuilt. So lots of the very small early mills have been rebuilt, and survived very little changed, providing a really wonderful service for a small local community that would either bring their wool clip into the mill, have them convert it for them, then take it home and weave it or knit it themselves, or it will be put out to a weaver. Weavers tended to work in families. from what I can trace, it was an apprenticeship system that you were born into. When the small mills became a little bit more adventurous, they started to bring weavers in to work inside the mills. But the Industrial Revolution in England was giving birth to massive factories. Wales was just adding a few little pieces of machinery to what they had. So we then had a situation where you got the small rural local mills just adding a little bit of machinery, small scale. And then you had some entrepreneurs coming in from outside and building factories. So in this area, Montgomeryshire, Llanidloes and Newtown were both built on big scale weaving. Even in the early days when they were setting up large converting facilities, they were bringing weavers in to work in big weaving sheds. So it was like a in-between period. But by the time they could bring in the first looms, they were then to the point of building large-scale factories. And they were very successful in the beginning, but they didn't last long. There was a bad case of boom and bust for an awful lot of them. They weren't really able to compete with Yorkshire. They were setting up new adventures. Yorkshire was practised at it. They often say that we didn't have the infrastructure of the railways, the this, the that, the transport. In the early day it was canals. But we also didn't know how to use the machinery. So a lot of fortunes were made and lost very quickly. But the small local mills just carried on plodding on. So you've got this big divide between the two. When Montgomeryshire, Llanidloes and Newtown, when they hit the wall, loads and loads of weavers were left without work. And lots of them moved down to South Wales, where there were so many good situations river-wise, where you've got lots of small rivers, lots of places where you can harness the water. And then you've got the market in South Wales of the heavy industry, the coal mines. So you've got a captive audience for your goods. So lots and lots of weavers just up sticks and moved, but lots of them also up sticks and went to America. They had to scatter. The population rise in Newtown was phenomenal.
Well, Cardiff, I mean, people think Cardiff is the capital of Wales, and it must have always been huge, but it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution.
So you've got these two different types of mills operating alongside each other. And we've tried to lay it out with the museum here by showing the hand-woven blankets, the small mill blankets. And these are the very, very typical Welsh carthen. They liked a nice fancy bed cover. These were often given as presents, particularly as wedding gifts. And I think that was a little bit of Welsh pride to have something lovely. And these were woven by hand on a loom that would fit inside your house, or you might have a shed attached to your house, a lean-to. And the characteristic that they nearly all have is the central seam, because your house wasn't really big enough to have a full-size wide loom. You have blankets as well, striped blankets, and then you have these fancy carthen. And then here we have another pile of, some of the ones I really love are the much simpler, undyed, cheap-coloured browns and greys. and then you have, they were very, very fond of indigo, and then red creeps in a little. But you can see, in a way, what dyes were available. And they stuck to what they knew and produced lots and lots of variations. But they're fantastic things. They're heavy and they'll block out the cold. And they'll last a long time.
They're highly graphical though too. They have so there are the striped ones, but some of them, I would think of them as a counterpane. I don't know if that's the term they use. So the one hanging on the wall has checkerboard patterns with smaller lines and smaller checkerboards. And I don't even know how to describe the red one that we're looking at. It's like pixelated.
Yes.
Like a pixelated explosion. Just gorgeous weaving. I can't even imagine.
These are actually double cloth. It's two, you've basically got two sets of colours being brought up and dropped down and then reversed. So you always find that a predominantly red blanket on the top
oh my gosh,
is completely different on the other side. The blue and the white in this shine through. And in America, they often call them sunshine and shade or sunshine and shadow. But a lot of the weaving tradition in America, where you speak of the coverlets, comes from the same place.
Yeah.
You've got Welsh settlers, you've got Dutch, German, and these types of double cloth were woven all over that part of Europe and then taken to America with settlers.
Well, I've been to the National Coverlet Museum in the United States. It's in upstate New York if anyone wants to go. And it does remind me a lot of what they were producing, the early ones that they were producing. They get different as time goes on.
Yeah.
But they were working in cotton for the most part.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quite interesting. They're often cotton and wool mixed or all cotton.
I believe cotton, if I'm remembering correctly.
You had the access to cotton.
That's true, yeah.
One thing I find really interesting is they all have a border around, which is actually made up of sections of the patterning in the centre. And with the American coverlets, they choose a different section, but they're still doing exactly the same thing. And they always manage to make trees. They look like pine trees standing on their ends, or trees that are a stem and a bobble. And that's the one thing I think you can really tell the difference between the American ones and ours. You can select which part of that you want to just repeat. Here they've changed the colour, so it throws it out a little bit. But on one like this, you'll see that they're repeating a section. And they'll just repeat that section again.
Right.
So the Americans have just chosen how to repeat that section and make another type of pattern.
Another pattern. Interesting.
But
this was woven. This is from the center all the way to the edge, woven as one piece. The border wasn't attached later.
So you really weave half a blanket. So what's always amazed me is they were working long hours. They were often weaving a 10, 12-hour day. You can't get tired. You can't get in a tempo with your loom. You just have to beat evenly
or
all
your
day
family.
long. Or when you come to match the blanket, the two halves won't match. So their weaving was automatic. They were just so used to doing it that they could just gently beat away all day without change, no getting tired, no change in the light altering anything.
Fascinating.
It's like knitting tension.
Yeah.
Yeah, having perfect tension.
Once you get it down.
When you see these, it always amazes me how they kept the tension so good. I have one that I bought just recently, and it's away for restoration, and that could be another rainy day I'll get to do that one. And I think it's from North Wales, and they did mix cotton and wool. And it's the white that's the cotton. And I always struggle with that because it's something you think of as American ones. But I have two now from North Wales that both have cotton.
Interesting.
It's the white.
Do you think could they get the cotton would be a whiter white? Was that why they were opting for it?
Both of these are slightly creamy, but then that's age. It's very, very difficult. Sometimes when you're repairing something, you get to open a seam up and you can see what it's like right inside. A lot of them have an edge that I can maybe steal a couple of threads from. If I have to fix the middle, sometimes you have to just sacrifice a few threads from the edge. And when you unravel, that you can just see if there's any fading by where you have that.
It was hidden.
Yeah. These ones again. These ones are from the same weaving clutch. I'm thinking it was probably an extended family. And this one another. They're basically made on the same pattern. You can see the resemblance between this and this. But there's something very characteristically different about these. And these are often fringed all the way around, whereas these ones were never fringed. And whoever the weaver was realised that if you fringe it, it's going to unravel. So they always knot a few at each corner. Now, I've only ever seen this one type done like that. And it's just a little family quirk where they've decided just knot a few at the corner and preserve the blanket's life.
Keep it. Oh, that's so
little
smart.
touches like that make you realise that it wasn't made by a machine, it was made by a human being. That's rather nice, that extra pride they put in their work.
That's lovely.
And these are the flannels that they were weaving. These ones are probably factory woven. These ones are not. These are handloom. Now that's very heavily fulled.
Oh yes, that's very thick.
Yeah, very, very thick.
So now, would this been a trouser?
This one came with this attached to it. Cloth for the bottom of a saddle.
Oh, well there you go.
And you also see it under the hames for horse, for a heavy horse. They were making things that were infinitely practical as well. This is the type of things that they were weaving for clothing tweed, for men's clothing tweed.
That's much more wearable. Yeah. It's still a thicker
quite
cloth,
soft,
though.
It's quite soft.
Yeah,
but
it has
again,
a
you
nice
can see
handle.
that's the width of the loom.
Yeah.
You know, it's half the width of a power loom.
Yeah. So
and
this
again,
looks more like a traditional tweed kind of look to it.
You'd be hard-pressed to say whether that came from Scotland, Yorkshire or Wales, really.
Yeah.
So that's why with the men's costume, we don't know. There's very, very little surviving, and we wouldn't know it really from English or Scottish if we got it, because they tended just to follow the same tradition.
Yeah.
That's a nice shirt. I like that one because the label is there. Real Welsh flannel. When the factory system came in, it was a little selling point to say, no, this is real Welsh flannel. None of this Yorkshire stuff. But that's a fairly early factory-made one.
So, and again, this would have been very popular locally, especially with the miners who are dealing with flammable substances.
We have drawers.
I imagine.
But they're all a bit boiled and misshapen by now, but just to sort of prove, and they all tend to be. That one's quite early. I really like the stripe on that. These are the sort of typical stripes. So that's a lady's one.
Oh, that's a lovely.
So that's for ladies'
sort of
petticoat,
pink shooting through it. Yeah.
That's a typical shirt one, but that's probably a Sunday best shirt. Not going down the pit in that; it's going to get far too dirty.
Yes,
it's a lovely quality,
very light
white. You feel the difference between the quality on that one and that one.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
that's noticeable.
So
yeah, much softer.
That's a best shirt.
Yeah.
But these are the sort of night shirts, petticoats.
So they still like some color in their fine shirts and their petticoats. So these all have like thin rows of light brown and dark brown and blue or pink or something going through
it's an economy really, because what do we have? Lots and lots of white wool. Then you have the occasional coloured sheep.
Right.
None of this wool marketing board, we don't know what to do with the brown. So you've got cream with two different browns and a little bit of blue just to cheer it up. And very often these aren't strong blues, they're often slightly weaker, and the pinks are probably the end of the dye when they've been dyeing red.
Okay.
So it's a weaker mixture. So they've economised and they've been sensible. But these were economy cloths. That again, that's an earlier piece.
So
they did like these heavier looking stripes for men's ones. Probably because they didn't show the dirt. But again, that's just a natural. Yeah, it's one of the ones that nobody wants. Gets put out to carpets these days. But they're lovely, bit coarse. But that's a typical working man's shirt material. And then you get another type again that was woven for the women's aprons. And all of those are fairly narrow looms. So they're earlier ones.
I think we think of fabric, coming upwards, like from our toes up to our waist. Yeah. But They were weaving back and forth, so it went around your body.
Yes, yeah.
From the loom or around your body.
Well,
I would have been in trouble in those days. I'd have had very short petticoats.
You just have to have a longer piece there.
The hip piece would have been halfway down my thigh.
Yeah. Some of the looms had... see, that one's actually got a hem. So they've got a hem. But that's a flannel woven for an apron.
Okay.
Very dark, tight weave. So it wouldn't show too much dirt.
I suppose until cotton came around, aprons were wool.
Linen.
Oh, they were doing linen. Okay, of course, yeah.
You see a lot in historical accounts when they're referring to things as linsey woolsey.
Okay.
And that's a warp of linen and then wool weft.
Okay.
That blue check is, you can see it. You can just see that the white, this one, it's mixed warp and weft of both. But the blue is wool and the white is linen. And then later on, when cotton was more available, it became linsey woolsey, was just cotton instead of linen. And that apron is just linen. So they would have had linen as well.
And of course, again, for a working apron, that wool would have been protective when you're working around fires.
They're heavy. And you see, in North Wales, they seem to have made more elaborate aprons. They have aprons with silk in.
Oh, wow.
They really rather like to border stripes at the bottom with a little bit of silk work.
Mm-hmm.
Just a
little bit of shine.
Oh, yes, just to
catch an eye or two.
Yeah. And I think weavers would have enjoyed doing that, just to say, look what I can do.
Yeah.
Mine's just that bit better than that other mill. Just that bit more individual. Or if you're weaving day in, day out, just thinking, I think I need to just produce something I can be really proud of.
Yeah.
Another nice source, sadly it's rolled up so you can't see it, you can only see the top here. That's a quilt made of tweeds and flannels.
Oh.
These would have been made very often on the farms.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're made from old used garments, and sometimes they've had access, especially to the flannels, maybe a little bit from a factory or from a mill. And sometimes, like this one, they're mostly everyday type of tweeds.
Okay.
So they're the sort of things men were wearing that we don't get to see. And the only time we do is when they're in a quilt and it's been preserved. That one is actually quite local to here, which is quite nice. It's very, very difficult to tell exactly where something comes from unless somebody can tell you. My mother made it and it came from there. And the other type of flannel that's used a lot is this type. You didn't have a blanket, you had a flannel quilt.
This is lovely. So this is basically two layers
of stuffed.
Yeah.
Very often with old clothing inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes with wool.
Mm-hmm.
In the later quilting traditions, when they were using cotton, they used wool most of the time.
Okay.
For the wadding inside. Loose carded wool, because it gave it a bit more bounce.
Right.
But these are so heavy, the flannel ones, that the wool will get compacted and squashed in. I have unpicked them and found that they've got carded wool in, and I have unpicked them and found that they've got bits of Grandad's trousers, bit of something else, and where there was a hole, they've put a bit of wool in as well. They're real economy. Make do and mend.
Right.
And use everything until it absolutely drops, and they make a quilt out of it.
Yeah.
But you could buy this. They'll have to be seamed down the middle somewhere.
It's beautifully quilted. The decorative quilting over it is lovely.
On the cotton, the quilting patterns tend to show up a bit more. Mm-hmm. But this one I rather like. It's got some very, very typical Welsh shapes in it. I love these leaves.
Yeah, those are beautiful.
The quilt behind here is more typical of cotton type.
Oh, wow.
And that's stuffed with wool. And you can see the relief on that much better,
that's
because
dramatic.
the wool is so plump. But the Welsh quilting tends to rely on a couple of shapes to frame the whole thing out, and then infilling with hearts and leaves.
It's beautiful.
Swirls, they're their favourite patterns. I quite like teaching quilting because one of the nice bits is sitting everybody down with pen and paper and just saying, okay, let's make shapes. And you don't need anything, you don't need any quilting kits, you just need to get the plate off the dresser when you want to do a semicircle. It's like doodling. Yeah, it's just no need for expensive kits or protractors or...
Yeah.
And they're quite often just a little bit squiff. That one is. It's just a little bit out of true square. And I just think that's...
Well, again, that's how you know it's handmade with love instead of in a factory machine setting.
It's like the looms. It takes up your kitchen table.
Yeah.
And you probably had to pack it away when everyone came in and wanted to
get it done.
So they used to work them on big frames. But even still, you've got to pack that up when it's not being worked on. I understand why the Americans had quilting parties where they'd all get together and finish one off.
Finish it, yeah.
But the Welsh, I think, it's a winter project. There were itinerant quilters as well.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and they went round in wagons, the whole family, and stayed on the farm while they did work. And you might find that a seamstress would be the wife, and the husband would mend fences. So there's lots and lots of accounts of itinerant workers. Itinerant seamstresses for clothing, tailors, and quilters.
That's
very possibly the quilting was done by Welsh people because that's a real specialist thing. But by all accounts, a lot of the itinerant were Irish.
I really appreciate the amount of time that you've given me today, Rosamond. This has been a massive education. And before we do stop, I'd love for you to just take a moment and tell people where they can find the museum, both in person and when you're open, and online, how they can find you as well.
The school is called the Old School, Witton, which is in Radnorshire, part of what is now Powys. Can I give you something with a link?
Yes, that's fine. So in the show notes, I'll have a link to
We do have a website, but it's now a little old because it's from the pre-COVID days when we were just beginning to set this project up, but we were still running artists and makers fairs. So we're now going to have to rewrite it just to totally dedicate it to the museum. But we've always said to people, if they can contact us through that, we can let them know what's going on. The initial idea with the school, which we're almost there, is to get it up to the stage of having the space for the museum, the gallery, which can also double as teaching space. So we hope this year to start on the teaching. We also have a shop in Prestine, which is the local town, where we sell some Welsh blankets and wool from a couple of other people. I have knitting from one lady who hand dyes and hand spins, and also wool from another lady who rears sheep specifically for wool. So it's lovely, undyed, choice of browns and greys and cream.
Beautiful, as nature intended.
We can always be contacted through that, and the address for the shop is theoldshop.wales, which is easy.
Perfect.
So the website for the museum needs to be remade, but it's a long address. But if you go to the shop address, you'll get some notes about and as soon as we get classes or anything open, we'll announce it through that. We're hoping this year to open from spring, and we're just getting a couple of volunteers together now. We should be opening Sundays, Mondays and Tuesdays. And then the shop will then be open Wednesdays, Fridays and Saturdays. But we've always said to people, because it happens like you're visiting, that if people give us a little bit of notice, they can always come by appointment. So
wonderful.
Because otherwise we're in a little bit of a far-flung place to...
but it's a beautiful drive to get here, so... come on out and see. This is definitely worth your time.
You come on a rainy day. In the summer, it's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
You'll have to come back.
I guess so. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I am so grateful to Rosamond for the time she spent with me last month. That interview was just a slice of what I was able to learn from her. Our interview happened toward the end of my trip, so I had a general outline of the story of Welsh woolen textiles, and Rosamond came along and added a great deal of color to that outline. I hope those of you who weave especially enjoyed that interview. I think there were a few moments in there that would mean a lot more to those of you who are weavers. I did a weaving class in high school, and it was enough for me to realize just how skilled the hand weaving on display was. I don't know if it made complete sense during the tour, but towards the end there, we were looking at blankets that were in two pieces that have a border all the way around them that is a different but related pattern to what is in the center, which is a different pattern, and it was all woven at the same time on the same loom. It was incredible. And Rosamond touched on the controversy of Lady Llaniver and her role in either creating or preserving the Welsh national costume, depending on who you ask. That is a hot button topic. And you need to pursue that some rainy day when you feel like traveling through a rabbit hole of debates around historic textiles. I hope to be able to connect with Rosamond again and learn more. If you find yourself in Powys County, or maybe you're making the trip to Wonderwool, Wales in April, do take the time to build in a visit to the Museum of Welsh Textiles. The exhibit is being changed over now, and in 2023 will feature the Art of Hand Weavers from April through December. And then in January through March of 2024, I expect if you reach out to the museum, they will open for you to come by appointment. A few more things before I go. First, I don't do mid-episode commercial breaks when I have an interview because I don't like to interrupt the flow of the discussion, but I wanted to let you know that I recently updated the Be a Booster page on the website to reflect my current affiliate relationships. If you're unfamiliar, the most popular form of advertising on podcasts is through affiliate marketing, meaning that I tell you about a product, and if you like the product and use my link to go to the website to order it, then I get a small percentage of the purchase price. That's at no extra cost to you. If you were to go to the site without using the link, the price is the same. There are different companies that manage the affiliate program for retailers. And from time to time, retailers will end their programs, or they'll switch to a different management company, or they'll take their affiliate program in-house and manage it themselves. So a few of the companies that used to be affiliates are no longer listed there for one of those reasons. But there are a few additional products listed there that I will fill you in on in a future episode. I only form affiliate relationships for products I have bought and used in my own home and am happy with. I get a lot of invitations to be an affiliate for different products. But if they aren't something I'd use, or I think that you'd want to use, or the quality just isn't there, then I don't talk about them. I can't guarantee you will have the same positive experience I had with each of the products listed on the Be a Booster page, but I can say that my own experience has been positive enough and the product has been of high enough quality that I feel confident in recommending them to you. So if you'd like to have a look at the new affiliate products, visit IthoughtIKnewHow.com and click the link to Be a Booster or look for the link in the show notes. Second, I have a few things coming up that I'd like you to be aware of. I'll be teaching a beginning Fair Isle class with Viveka Velupillai of Uradale Farm on March 18th and 25th. That is via Zoom. Learn more at uradale.com in the store under online classes. It's too late to get the kit, but you're welcome to join in using your own DK weight wool. The December mystery yarn boxes will be back this year. Those will go on sale in early May. I have one Shetland-born designer this year who is creating something for us to knit with the yarn of 6 of the yarn producers there in Shetland. There will also be some goodies by local artists and makers, and there will be 2 colorways to choose from this year. More details to come about that. Also, people are starting to ask about the tours for 2024. We will continue to offer our Fair Isle and Lace Weeks as well as contemporary crafts, but are planning our way through 2 new offerings. and we want to get those settled before we announce the dates and such. Jolene at Island Vista is working away diligently at that. We are hoping to announce those sometime in May or June once the first set of tours for this year are over. The information will go out first so you can see the dates and tour options, and then patrons will get first crack at reserving a space, followed by those who have asked to be put on the waiting list for 2024. At that point, we open the remaining spots to the wider world. So if you'd like first crack, look into becoming a patron of the show over at patreon.com/IThoughtIKnewHow, where options start as low as $1 a month. If you'd like second crack, send a request to be added to the 2024 waitlist to info@islandvista.co.uk with your full name and what tours you are interested in. That's all for now, everyone. I'll be back in 2 weeks. In the meantime, thank you for listening and knitting with me for a bit. If you'd like to support the show, check the show notes for ways to make that happen. Special thanks to my patrons, Knit New Haven and Morehouse Farm, for sponsoring the podcast. The show notes are also where you will find links to any reference materials I used as I prepared the show, so be sure to check those out. Find me on my social media accounts as I Thought I Knew How, except on Twitter, where it's just Thought I Knew How. The groups on various platforms are all called I Thought I Knew How Podcast. Until next time, may you be blessed with stitches that never drop, yarn without joins, and plenty of time to knit.